Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where no MGM, no streaming services are willing to pay $600 million for the latest Bond movie. They put a price on it. They actually put a price on it. It was a secret price, but it got out because it's an amazing story. And I thought $120 million was too high for Borat 2, but look at this ask. Now, it wasn't too ridiculous, apparently, because according to Bloomberg, who broke the story, and Deadline, who expanded upon it, streamers were willing to go as high as $300 million. There was no deal. I don't believe there will be a deal, but this is still pretty freaking fascinating stuff. And that's why it's the focus of today's episode, because it's very telling. All right, so what's the thought process here? It's a window inside the minds of Hollywood, which sometimes seem to make no sense. But this makes a lot of sense. All right, so No Time to Die cost $250 million to make. Because, you guys are like, put it on streaming. Well, here's the reality of the situation. So let's, again, break it down. So No Time to Die cost $250 million to make. These are conservative numbers. But $250 million to make, and will cost another $100 million to advertise. But you know what? Let's call it 150 because they have to run a very extended ad campaign with stops and starts. You want to advertise your movie for a year? Try almost 2 years. That's difficult to do. All right, so anyway, and some of that ad money has already been spent because No Time to Die was just about to come out when the pandemic hit. It was one of the earlier films. So they've had ad buys, which is, I think, particularly why the $300 million offer from streaming services was a non-starter. Because surely Barbara Broccoli, who now heads up the Bond franchise, she inherited it from her father, I think she's looking to do more than barely break even. She is a businesswoman after all. So from Broccoli's standpoint, I think $600 million is actually a pretty reasonable, place for her to start in the negotiations. They started and ended there, basically. I think, you know how to, negotiating 101. You throw out a number a little higher than what you're looking for. So I think Barbara probably would have gone as low as 500, as we're about to discuss. But she said 600 to begin with. they cut her in half. But that's actually, as I said, not bad, because the first two Daniel Craig Bond movies actually did that worldwide. They just almost got to 600 million. In those days, that was considered not a bad box office. Although today, of course, if you don't hit the $1 billion club, what are you even doing, right? Only one Bond film has hit the $1 billion club, and that, of course, was Skyfall. But during the pandemic, it's unlikely No Time to Die will get to the heights of Skyfall, the $1 billion club Bond movie, and also even Spectre, which was not good, but, still made a lot of money because that's just the movie business these days, particularly with, marquee franchises. So as I said, I suspect Broccoli and company would even take $500 million because that would have given them a nice little $100 million profit. Not bad during a pandemic. Look at Tenet, a film so similar to Bond that Bond debuted a new trailer in front of Tenet when it finally hit theaters. That's the name of the game when it comes to movie advertising. You put like trailers with similar content because you're going after the same audience. And Tenet is crawling towards $350 million. So by comparison, $500 to $600 million guaranteed. Who wouldn't take that deal if Barbara Broccoli? I mean, I don't blame her for trying to get it. But it also shows, though, why $300 million wouldn't work, the streaming services counter either. Because why would you anger some fans and all movie theater owners for less money? Or even perhaps the same amount of money because, it's just getting worse out there. So there's no guarantee that another movie could even get to the heights that Tenet has. Because, you're heading the second wave, third wave, some people say, is hitting Europe, where a lot of that Tenet money came from. And for instance, I think it was either Italy or Spain, but their movie theaters have just closed down again. So it's not good out there. It's not good. So 300 is, but still, even still, 300 is what you could get going with a theatrical release. So that's just not going to work from the studio's perspective. Bloomberg and Deadline also reported that Broccoli considered putting Bond on premium video on demand, but ultimately decided against that as well. That's really the only way I think they could have made their money. It's a guaranteed pay, check up front from the streaming services. So I can see why that's the most attractive offer. But we'll talk about the streaming services in a moment. But that clearly doesn't make any financial sense for them, because remember, PVOD is a purchase point. transaction where you do kind of sell tickets. But a streaming service is in the game of getting and keeping subscribers. So they have a different business model. So it would be a nice feather in their cap to have Bond. Apple is the only company I can see where it really would be worth it to them because nobody has Apple TV basically. And this would be a way to maybe, I'm curious, would you sign up for Apple TV if it meant you could get Bond? But also, since Bond is just a movie and not a show, you'd only subscribe for like maybe a month, right? Or, you would, maybe, I don't know if Apple has a free trial right now anymore or not, but, it's not, you're not really going to get the bang that they need for that. Now, but clearly, speaking of money, we're not just dealing with the pandemic, but an economic recession. And ain't nobody got movie money right now. Certainly not $30 on top of the money people are already spending to subscribe to all these new streaming services, which have a constant flow of content for them to watch. So additional purchases, that's just not going to happen. Some of you have said you've even had to cut back on what streaming services you subscribe to because of everything that's going on. It's going to be very unlikely you add a movie on top of that, especially now that we're so far into the pandemic. Trolls World Tour clearly benefited from being first early on when everyone thought this was just going to last a month or so. It did not. All right, but the No Time to Die tentative deal, as I said, is very revealing from both perspectives, that of the studio and of the streaming services. Now, let's start with the streaming services. With them, they have seemed to be a bottomless pit of money, but it seems we found the bottom. $300 million. They wouldn't go beyond that. You would think Netflix would be like, name your number. And Barbara Broccoli did. And Netflix said, whew, too rich for my blood. They also lost out on the bidding war for Borat. As I told you, they bid 80 and Amazon bid 120 and Netflix did not come back to the table. They were like, have fun over there, Amazon. Did anyone watch Borat this weekend? It's impossible to tell how it did because, Amazon doesn't have that, doesn't really have a ranking service, I believe. I mean, you guys are people are certainly talking about it, but it's very hard to see what kind of value they got there. Now, keep in mind that $300 million also is the very bottom because Netflix, they're really the industry leader here. They spend anywhere from $65 to $150 on their biggest movies, which is about $100 million lower than the biggest Hollywood blockbusters. So that's another interesting thing to point out there. Why would you go to a Hollywood studio over Netflix? Well, you can get $100 million more out of a Hollywood studio because they can get to $1 billion at the box office. So that gives you an idea of why somebody would go to a studio over a streaming service and what kind of content a studio is looking for at this point because of the way the market's changed and where people watch what. People don't want to go to the movie theater, even in healthy times, unless they feel that it's worth that extra expense and time. And let's be honest, sometimes inconvenience, because movie theaters don't police themselves very well. But anyway, also don't forget that Netflix doesn't have to advertise really either. They have no advertising budget on top of all that because Netflix, for instance, advertises their overall service and rarely singles out content, letting the algorithm do that for them. So Bond should feel nice that the streamers were willing to at least double their usual spending, right? So that's a nice compliment. Now, on the studio side, clearly and understandably, they ain't taking any financial hits on their movies. I know some of you have been like, just release it. We want to watch it. How long can you wait? But I mean, like, how low can they go? I mean, I think that even if Bond has been pushed back to spring of 2021, but it still should do better than $300 million, right? I mean, it should do better than $300 million. So there's no point in releasing it earlier. So I think that, obviously the way that these price tags are being put on these movies is whether or not they can at least turn a small profit on their investment if they were to release on digital. For instance, let's take Borat 2. That price tag was obviously reached by an assumption of matching what Borat would have done in theaters conservatively during a pandemic, because it did about 120 domestic during, under normal circumstances. But, I think the brand has eroded a little bit. It's been so long since the first movie. I still feel 120 was a bit high during the pandemic. I don't think Borat 2 would have gotten to 120 globally if it had been released in theaters. What do you think? What would be your guess? I would put it at maybe, because remember, Tenet did 350, or it's getting close to 350. So I don't know, maybe Borat would have done 120 worldwide. Maybe it would have. That's interesting. I think I would have capped it at maybe 100. But again, this has been complicated by not just a pandemic, but one that's created an economic recession. In fact, this week, studios are also beginning to worry that even if all movie theaters were to open back up, who will be able to afford to go? This is a big question. I mean, it's a 1-2 punch of health and economic concerns, both of which are particularly bad for Black and Hispanic moviegoers, which often make up anywhere from a third to a half of a movie's audience. So they might be right off the board right away. That's really bad for Hollywood. And also you have to take older moviegoers off the board as well, who are a consistent source for movies, particularly certain types of movies. So that's a problem. And then you have small children. Their parents could be concerned about them. So how much of a viable audience is really left at this point that are willing to go to the theater? I mean, I think it's a problem. So also New York State, by the way, New York State's now legendary movie theaters opened up this weekend. It's like, here we go. Okay, Cuomo, did Cuomo save the movie business? He didn't, because even though they were open anywhere except for New York City, I will be curious to see what happens when New York City comes online. But I can tell you that New Yorkers are the most careful, I think, in the country, New York and Los Angeles, because we're in very crowded areas. And I just don't think people are going to go, even if they do open up the movie theaters here. But New York State, where Tenet is now a new movie, and the idea was that all these poor New Yorkers outside of New York City were just chomping at the bit to see Tenet when Cuomo would allow them. And now that they couldn't produce a single theater in the top 10 grossing theaters for Tenet, being beaten out by theaters which have been playing Tenet for weeks now. So that's real bad. This week I heard Hollywood, the most recent update I've heard on Hollywood's thinking is that they're not planning to release any big theatrical releases until March 2021. Maybe. This is a constantly evolving situation. And as for Wonder Woman, which is still set for Christmas Day, again, I've heard Warner Brothers feels they have till December 1st to make a decision on what to do there. Because again, they're just going to move their own picture around. They're just going to move one of their own pictures out. So they don't have to jump on a date. They already have the date reserved with another movie. They just have to swap it out. So we need to, as we go forward and we wonder what Hollywood's going to do, we have to keep an eye not just on what's going on with the pandemic, but also the economy as well. And while the box office continues to be pretty pitiful, I mean, it's not choice content, but come on, these numbers would be better if everyone in a meaningful way felt it was safe to go to the movies and could afford to go to the movies. I mean, this is bad. Also, it just goes to show you how important the big cities are to moviegoing in theaters. Yet over on Netflix, they just updated their most watched movies of all time, and in the span of 4 months, they released this list about 4 months ago in July. Now they've updated it, and a bunch of new movies that just came out have already popped onto this list. That's amazing. The Old Guard, Enola Holmes, Project Power, and Kissing Booth 2 have almost knocked The Irishman off the top all-time list over at Netflix. Also, what the hell, Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson? How did your star power not get The Devil All the Time into the top 10? I mean, that's a little embarrassing. And just goes to show that maybe those guys don't sell tickets outside of their respective franchises. I think Spider-Man and Batman, though, will be just fine. But way to flex that star power, Charlize Theron, Henry Cavill, Millie Bobby Brown, Jamie Foxx, and Joey frickin' King. Now you can see why Brad Pitt just cast her in his upcoming action movie. And none of these movies cost even $150 million to make, much less $300 million. As for streaming overall, Nielsen put out another top 10, but they got to work on getting these numbers faster because this is from a month ago. Imagine if we did box office reports a month late. It would be ridiculous, and that's how ridiculous this is. But still, Netflix has almost the entire top 10. That's another reason for something like The Boys to come out weekly, so that by the time the Nielsen numbers come out, it's still fresh content, and people can be like, oh, I should watch that, instead of, oh, I already missed it. So as you can see, Netflix has almost the entire top 10 with a healthy mix of original and acquired content, while The Boys continues to be a bright spot for Amazon. Ryan Murphy, after some real misses, finally has a monster hit for Netflix. Some of us didn't care for it, but you can't argue with results. This is impressive. While Enola Holmes is the only movie on the list. That's all series otherwise. That is amazing. Why can't Henry Cavill get more work? Danny Garcia should be sending this Nielsen top 10 and the top 10 movies of all time on Netflix around to everybody and being like, I promise he will not be difficult. Now, as for streaming services, on iTunes, it's also real slim pickings, with the #1 movie getting a 0 on Rotten Tomatoes. But it's apparently cheap and inappropriate, and who doesn't love that? On Netflix, Over the Moon is #1. Hooray! I'm so happy for that film. I feel horrible I didn't get a chance to review it. I think it's phenomenal, and I think it's a serious contender all of a sudden to Soul for the best animated feature of the year. I don't know. The Academy's going to have to decide who they want to send a message to more. Netflix with their refusal to do the theatrical window of 3 months usually, and Disney, who they feel is maybe a little devoid of artistic integrity these days. But Pixar has so far managed to stay out of this argument, so it could be a really close race between the two of them. But I'm very happy for Over the Moon. Fantastic. You should definitely watch it. Love it, love it, love it. Philippa Sue. What a great job. All right, Netflix released a bunch of new content this week, and you're watching all of it. It's all doing quite well. While The Haunting of Bly Manor and Hubie Halloween continue to be holiday hits for the service. And on Disney Plus, even though it's just 7 minutes, Once Upon a Snowman is a monster hit, even unseating The Simpsons for #1. That is like 20 plus seasons of content. So do you know how many people have to be watching Once Upon a Snowman for it to shoot to #1? A lot of people. It was fun. It was really enjoyable. Josh Gad, that's just his signature role. He's so good at it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I really liked it. I just thought it was great. But it's only 7 minutes. Toy Story of Terror also hit the service and debuted in the top 10. As you can see, people really like what they like on Disney+. They keep watching the same stuff over and over. And trust me, Disney sees what we see. And as I told you, there's some Disney animation original content coming, and it's going to make a lot of you very happy, as you can see. Now, that's all I can say about it for now. Now, as for this coming week, Netflix, speaking of animation, debuts anime series Blood of Zeus. That debuts on Tuesday. I'm going to be reviewing it tomorrow. It's phenomenal. It's so good. I watched all 8 episodes this past week, and I just thought I did not expect it to be as good as it is. Sony's The Craft Legacy hits PVOD on Wednesday. I also watched that over the weekend, and that embargo lifts midnight on Tuesday, which you'll see. I have mixed feelings about that movie, but people are going to be talking about it. And finally, of course, on Friday, The Mandalorian Season 2 finally returns, finally gets underway on Disney Plus. I will be reviewing each episode individually. I believe, like last time, they will not be making it available in advance to the press, so I hope there's a really great surprise that's been worth this ridiculously secretive ad campaign. Although, as I told you, I think there are other reasons that they don't want to discuss Season 2, and they just want to let it speak for itself. The lack of even interviews for this show have been incredible. I mean, it's like, wow. It's shocking. All right, we'll talk about it more, of course, when the show debuts. So what are you planning to watch? What have you been watching? And would you have paid $30 to rent, or buy, I guess outright, we'll decide what they would have done. Okay, I guess it would be, would you have paid $30 to buy or $20 to rent for 48 hours? No Time to Die. Would you have done that? Did Barbara Broccoli maybe make the wrong decision? Should she have released No Time to Die on PVOD? Or are you like, I ain't paying for it. You're right, Barbara. Hold that. And will you even see it when it comes out in April? I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see what we might be so pent up. We'll I'll see everything in theaters. Movie theaters, the services they have, the pass, like Fandango's pass and AMC, those are pretty darn good. But I wonder if they might be in such dire financial straits, maybe they won't want to offer that deal. I'm very curious to see how movie theaters return. When they do, they will return. We just aren't sure when. All right, share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.